Hello, my name is Randy Scamihorn, and this is the Chairman's Brief. As Chairman of the Cobb Board of Education, I have the privilege of serving as a spokesperson for the Cobb School Board. The school board, together with our staff, students, parents, and community, make up our team striving for our common goal, student success. This fall, Cobb voters are going to choose whether to continue using Ed-SPLOST funding method to pay for school needs. Today, I'm joined by our top man in finance to help us understand our options, Chief Financial Officer Brad Johnson. Brad, thanks for coming on. Very briefly, tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you, sir. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, and after I graduated from college and graduate school, I moved to Cobb County. My first jobs in finance over the years were in several major corporations in the Atlanta area. In the year of 1988, I got on with Cobb County Schools. I have worked myself up through the organizational structure here, and now for the last 9 or 10 years, I've served in the role of Chief Financial Officer for the district. My responsibility is to handle all the financial activities of the school district. Some of those activities are things like accounting, financial reporting, accounts payable, capital projects accounting, budget, financial analysis, payroll, local school accounting, audit. It's a variety of things we do with the school district. But our school district has a $1.3 billion budget and over 18,000 employees. So there's a lot of money and financial procedures that goes into our operation.
As financial officer and over such a large department, you interface with just about everybody from the school level up. Is that correct?
That's true. We work with everybody in the school district, more prominently with principals and administrators to develop budgets. We monitor budgets during the school year. We monitor financial statements. Everything we do, all operations in the school district are indirectly related to money. So we're involved in everybody's business.
Do you work with procurement, or is that a different department, or how do you interface with that?
So procurement used to be under my supervision, but several years ago, it was a better internal control to reestablish the business service function. So those functions were transferred into business services separate from finance, and I think that's a great internal control decision that the superintendent made.
Okay. What governs what you can do and can't do? Is it Georgia law, federal laws, regulations? How does that work?
Well, it's a combination of things. There are state regulations, like travel regulations, that we follow. But most commonly, we have financial procedures and governmental accounting principles that we follow. It's a professional standards that we follow and procedures that we follow.
Okay. Now, today primarily what I want to talk about is Ed-SPLOST, Educational Special Local Option Sales Tax. From your perspective, what is Ed-SPLOST in financial terms?
Well, in financial terms, Ed-SPLOST is a source of funding for the school district to purchase capital improvements. And in Ed-SPLOST, it's a sales tax on consumer goods in Cobb County. And it's a very simple process. People buy goods and services in the county. The Department of Revenue collects those revenues, and then they transfer those monies to us to spend on educational programs that are approved by the voters in Cobb County.
Okay. Ed-SPLOST hasn't been around forever. When did it start, and how did we finance school improvement needs before it became available?
Okay, well, in 1996, there was a constitutional amendment for SPLOST programs for public school districts in Georgia. And when that got approved by constitutional amendment, then Cobb County Schools was able to use this additional funding source. Our first SPLOST was in 1999. We had a SPLOST II in 2004, another one in 2009. SPLOST IV was in 2014, and our current SPLOST started in 2019. SPLOST is a very good method of collecting money for school districts. There are several advantages of it. One is that it's a pay-as-you-go method, and as everybody knows about finance in Cobb County schools, that we budget and handle taxpayer money very conservatively. So when you pay as you go, we're not going into any debt as we buy capital improvements to educate our students. Another advantage of the SPLOST program is that it's been estimated that up to 30% or maybe even more of SPLOST revenue comes from citizens outside of the school district. People come into Cobb County, they budget goods, and they purchase goods and services. And so we have people that don't even live in Cobb County paying for our capital improvements in the school district. Another great advantage of the SPLOST is that we're able to use those money in the past when we had previous bond issues to pay off those bond issues. And that was handled back in 2007. We were able to pay off all long-term debt for the school district. So a great advantage to us for that. Now, there are other programs that were used in the past prior to SPLOST, prior to the constitutional amendment in 1996. And those options were limited to the general fund millage rate and long-term general obligation bonds. Now, the general fund millage rate is really meant to support the daily operations of the school district's general fund. And the school district's general fund, 92% of that budget is for teachers and support personnel, salaries and fringe benefits. The other 8% goes to operating costs such as utilities and supplies and equipment. But the problem with trying to use general fund millage rate is that our general fund millage rate is now 18.9 mils, and there's a state cap of the millage rate at 20 mils. Now, what is a mill? Oh, well, a mill is $1 per $1,000 of assessed value. So since we're so far close to the cap, it's hard to raise enough money for capital improvements using that. And really, the use of the general fund is just for the daily operations of the school district. So the other option previously to SPLOST was long-term obligation bonds. Well, we haven't had a long-term obligation bond in many years. The last one was in 1995. And so what that is basically, it's a loan. We take out a loan and we pay it back with interest. So a bond is something that not only do we have to pay it back with interest, we also have to establish a debt service millage rate also in order to have the funds available to make principal and interest payments. Now, just for our viewers, an example of this would be people buy cars. And let's just say you wanted to buy a new car. And then the car costs $20,000. Well, you would pay that car loan back, but you'd also pay more than the $20,000 because you'd have to finance it, and maybe the finance cost is $2,000 or $3,000 above that. So you'd end up paying $23,000 back for the $20,000 car. Now, just to relate that to our last bond issue that was in 1995, that bond issue was $221 million that we borrowed. The bonds are usually a duration of around 20 years. But over that period of time, before we paid back all of our bonds, we paid $92 million in interest costs on that last bond issue. So it's an astounding number. So when you compare and contrast SPLOST to bond issues, the SPLOST it's not even a contest. It's absolutely the favorable way to go.
A couple of things that come to mind based on your explanation there is, one is we are not in debt in any way. Is that correct?
We have no long-term debt in the school district. And we haven't had any long-term debt since 2007. So in 2007, the debt service millage rate that we used to have, that was in addition to the general fund millage rate, disappeared. We were able to eliminate it because we didn't need any money to accumulate money to pay off the long-term debt.
But many, and you said early on that we use our customers, our taxpayers' money very conservatively. and we track them very carefully to the penny. But also, does that not gain efficiency so that we have more money in the sense that we're not wasteful?
Well, we're not wasteful in our money. Every year we have an annual budget process, and we deal with, and like I said, we have a $1.3 billion budget. Well, all the accounts, and there's tens of thousands of accounts for a budget that large, all those accounts are assigned the responsibility to an individual administrator or a principal, and those accounts are looked at, each one of them, every year. So we know what things are going to cost or what we think they're going to cost, and we try to make the best estimates we can. And then those items are spent according to what the board approves as the budget. So we think that we're very efficient in our process.
Okay. Some people have said that everything should be handled through property taxes. Do you think that's even possible?
I really don't. The general fund millage rate is there to pay for daily operations of the school district. I don't think it was ever meant to be able to pay for capital improvements. When we talk about building new schools, or we talk about all the money it takes for technology in the schools, or building additional classrooms, there's just not enough money to do everything.
Okay. If our voters decide not to use Ed-SPLOST to pay for these needs, what options must the district consider to handle the cost of needed improvements?
Well, you'd go back to either one of those two options that we do have, which is the general fund millage rate and would be long-term obligation bonds. And based on what I said before, the bonds do have an interest cost to them, but they are an option. But as SPLOST, the voters for SPLOST vote on SPLOST, they also have to vote on the bonds. And with the bonds having an extra cost to it, it doesn't seem like that's really the greatest option.
So really, Ed-SPLOST is keeping us from going into long-term debt, which is really saving us financial interest money. That, like you mentioned, $92 million, that was years ago. I don't know what it would be today, a guesstimation. Would you care to hazard a guess on what we might be paying if we had to go into long-term debt?
Well, the school district used to use bonds frequently. All school districts did because they didn't really have other options to do it like we have today in SPLOST. Long-term bonds were first used in Cobb County in the 1950s. And so in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s, long-term bonds were used. And there were 2 or 3 every decade, that bond issues that were passed by the voters. But for every bond issue that was passed, there were interest costs associated with it. And so the last bond issue we had, I noted that you had $92 million in interest costs just for that one bond issue. But so you can imagine over the course of 60 or 70 years, the interest cost that the taxpayers had to end up paying. So we think that SPLOST is a great option to support education for students in Cobb.
As a member of the public, not involved extensively with the education or Cobb County school education, is there a way I can go and see where our money is being spent with Ed-SPLOST?
Absolutely. Our internet site for the school district is probably one of the finest and detailed around. We're the only school district that has a SPLOST notebook, and we've had that for all of our SPLOST, that details out all the things that we were planning on spending. What are all the needs to educate students in Cobb? And on the website, as if with the general fund as well, there is a tremendous amount of detail as far as how we plan our money, what projects we're planning on supporting, and the citizens have tremendous detail to look at to review what we're doing.
Okay. What are our exemptions for our taxpayers and our customers?
Exemptions are a great benefit for the citizens of Cobb County. They really are. And it was always meant to be a benefit for Cobb County citizens. And there are a number of exemptions, and I'll just name a few of those. One exemption that people are familiar with is the homestead exemption. So if you own a home in Cobb County and you have to occupy it, then you can have a $10,000 exemption on your property taxes every year in Cobb County. Another exemption that is popular in Cobb County is the age 62 and older exemption. So when you turn age 62, you can apply for this exemption and you will be exempt from all school property taxes and all school debt. And of course, we don't have any debt. But that's another great exemption for Cobb County citizens. Probably the other major exemption that we have available to us is the Freeport exemption. And that's an exemption on inventories in factories and warehouses so that those inventories are not taxed. So they're not taxed twice, because when you sell the goods and services they produce, they'll get taxed at that point. So there are some other exemptions that are smaller, things like Social Security disability exemptions, veterans exemptions. And I think all the Cobb County citizens would agree that those are very worthwhile exemptions to have. Living in Cobb has its perks, and these exemptions are some of these perks that Cobb County citizens have enjoyed for years.
Yeah, so very good. So if there's not much room for the board to raise the millage rate to pay for these needs, would that mean one option to consider would be to look at reducing exemptions for Cobb property owners?
The board always has the option of looking at exemptions along with the legislative delegation to see if that's something they want to continue. That would be a board decision.
But we're doing so well, I don't think any of us wants to do anything like that.
I think that everybody I talk to, and I've lived here for years, and my kids were raised in Cobb County schools, we all have enjoyed many of these exemptions.
Okay. Well, one option on any decision is not to do anything. I mean, that is a decision when decisions have to be made. The decision not to do anything to generate funds like Ed-SPLOST bonds or increase the millage rate, what kind of impact would that have on our schools and on our community?
Okay, so I'll try to stay to a financial perspective on that.
Okay.
But it's been discussed by the board and the community that there are over $2 billion in needs for the school district that are needed above and beyond what we're going to do in the SPLOST. So those needs are going to be handled one way or the other in the long term. If you decide not to maintain your buildings, they're going to start to deteriorate, and it's going to cost you even more in the long run. We still have a growing county. There are new facilities and new technology that our new students need. Well, how are we going to educate those kids if we don't have all those monies available to us? So it's a very hard call, and it's the notion of not providing those funds to maintain the assets that we have and also provide education equipment and items for new students. That's a hard thing to consider.
Okay. Well, and it makes it so much better for the opportunities for children with that money's there, because regardless, approximately 110,000 children show up at our doors every August. So
Absolutely.
You agree with that?
Absolutely.
So, absolutely. Anything comes to mind with our conversation today that you want to add as we finish up?
I think from a pure financial perspective, the voters need to look at what the options we have that are available to us to raise money, and they need to make a decision on what's the most cost effective for to have education in Cobb County, and they need to make a decision. And hopefully some of the options I've discussed today can bring Cobb County voters to a conclusion before they vote.
Good, good. Well, we certainly hope that they make the decisions, the same decision they've been making in the past for our Ed-SPLOST, because it gives so many more opportunities for our children. Thanks, Brad, for helping voters understand the choices they'll have on November the 2nd. And thank you for watching. Regardless what your choice is, please be sure to vote that day. Your vote stands to impact our students, education, and our local economy in a major way. Be sure to join me again next week to discuss some of the great things happening in Cobb County School District. Have a good day.